All right. Did you see what I did there, guys? Nothing big. I am actually going to have a longer intro that I'm working on for the show. So, how is everybody today? I see I have Shelly and the Dollhawk here so far. I'm sure some other people are waiting in the wings. Appreciate you guys being here as always, and I am well rested today, much better than yesterday. So I got done the stream. I told my wife, I said, "Well, that was about terrible because between the technical problems and me being tired and my brain not functioning, my dyslexia kicking in to overdrive yesterday, it was tedious for me at least. Hopefully, not so much for you all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some things about Caesar today because I started thinking about why did Caesar actually cross the Rubicon? What were the deeper motivations for all that? And I had forgotten so much because I haven't really delved into this stuff since I was in high school and, you know, reading Latin and trying to translate it into English. So, I looked at a few articles last night and no one really got down to it. And then I found a decent one from PBS. So I want to cover that here sort of first. Um, oh yeah, man, don't worry about being in the chat or not. Um, I know what time of day it is for a lot of people, right? This late afternoon, pre-evening stream that I do is just good for me because one, I tend to sleep late, I tend to be up late. So I know I can keep this time, but I'm not trying to do this in the midst of the prime time evening hours because there's a lot of other people that I like to watch, and not that I wouldn't, but we also have the ends justify the memes going on. That is this evening over on my other channel that most of you are aware of. If you're not, the links can be found in the YouTube description. Also, I believe on the D Live description, I have that set up. So you guys can go check that out. And as a reminder, there is an entropy. If you want to have really spicy chat that I probably can't read, that's the place to do it. If you want to donate, you can do it there as well. You can donate on D Live, of course. But I more or less have D Live as just a basic backup or alternative to people who don't want to use Google endorsed, that is Alphabet Tech. You say you usually have to try to have things wrapped up by now. Well, I mean, that's understandable. But yeah, I mean, being on the East Coast too, I know that, at least for American listeners, I'm doing this rather early in the afternoon. So, I understand that. I enjoy everyone who's here and who can listen. I understand the chat isn't always super active, but whatever you guys can do, I mean, it helps me stay properly motivated. So, and then along with, I got on a little tangent there, sidetracked, but along with obviously donations, that's not as big of a deal as helping my channel grow. And I am slowly growing. I do slowly grow, but of course the algorithm seems to be against everyone. So much so that Yiz right now, because she's probably flagged, won't even stream on YouTube anymore. And this is an issue. And now she gets enough donations regularly or can afford to go over to Odyssey and get a premium subscription and I guess stream up there. I'm just not in that kind of financial position, which is again why if you guys donate, it helps. But maybe that'll change after next year when I get this book done as well. So we'll see. We'll see how the finances go. Also, my wife should be, I would assume, given that she's slowly assembling a team at her work, should be doing better there as well. So it's just a matter of for me, for us, it's a matter of which priority do we want to chase money? Do I want to go and work other jobs outside of the home, or do we want to focus on our family and cut down on things and let it be in God's hands and know that we'll be taken care of, which I truly believe. I don't really like the idea of chasing after wealth. So, if you guys didn't know, tonight on the Ends Justify the Memes, we will have our friends Jeremy and Delaney from the Weekly Narrative. And I will be there co-hosting with Holly Midlife again because Tank is still gay and on vacation. So hopefully that goes well and there are no system crashes here. Last night watching Jeremy and Delaney stream, I wasn't in the chat as much as I'd like to be because I was busy doing other stuff because I'm, believe it or not, guys, constantly working. Even when I'm watching YouTubers or listening to them in the background on my TV, I'm generally working. Not working, I'm working out, cleaning the house, or doing something around the house that needs to be done, right? And cooking dinner, going grocery shopping, things that you need to do to sustain your life. So, and being one that doesn't get a lot of sleep, I was up till I went and had the memes done for today. I mean, I do need to filter through them a little bit and resize some of them, but generally, basically, I was up till about 3 a.m. working on memes before I went to bed, so I didn't have to do it today. But, that's just me. That's just me. I'm a wild and crazy guy. So, as usual, we'll do the regular readings that we do. I'll read the Politics of Obedience. I will read some of the Naked Communists because that's what we've been reading. And I want to bring you a little news story. So I'm going to start there before I get into Caesar because, what in the ever-loving graces of God is this? So, the racist legacy many birds carry. What? This, folks, is from the Washington Post, by the way. And I don't know what the point of this article is. I didn't read through the whole thing, but we can read a little bit of it together today. But the Washington Post brought us the most important article of our time. This is in the Climate Environment Interactive. And birds' names, racism. This is all in the tag for the website. Now, I don't know why we're not talking about the border crisis, the massive inflation going on, the fact that, the Wuhan thing is a pretty big deal, right? And the Chinese have talked about going to nuclear war over an investigation, which they're not going to do. But, it's kind of silly. Or the ridiculousness of the hearing the other day on the insurrection. How about Vladimir Putin? Vladimir Putin, I mean, I know this is a few days old, but Vladimir Putin and, of course, Biden are meeting, and Biden's not able to have a press conference with Putin because, at the G7 just the other day, he completely embarrassed himself. Again, there will be memes tonight. There will be plenty of memes. So this is a few days ago, of course, over a week ago. But still, why? What in the world is this? The racist legacy many birds carry? So let's read this garbage. Karina Newsom is a black ornithologist, as rare as some of the birds she studies. Ooh, a black lady studies birds. That's so rare. Social justice must come along and make black people study birds. I mean, I don't really know, but that's what it opens up with. Who cares? People get to make, in a free society, their own choices. No one's kept people of ethnicity from various African groups, right? Nations, black folks, if you would. I don't think anyone's kept them out of this field. I can tell you what has kept black people out of certain fields: unions. But, we're not going to talk about that today. Just saying. Here it says, when she joined Georgia uh, Adu Aban, I'm probably not going to read her last name because I'm not sure how you say it properly. Last year, the group executive director called her hiring a first step to beginning working to break down barriers so that people from all communities can fully enjoy birding and the outdoors. Well, good for them. Good for their inclusivity of all the black folk who were excluded by those evil white supremacists, those racist. You can't be bird watching. You can't study birds, you black people. What is this article about? But overcoming those barriers will be daunting. As with the wider field of conversation, racism and colonialism are in the ontological DNA, or ornithological DNA, if I can pronounce words correctly. Much better than I did yesterday, I could say that. Indelibly linked to the original story. The challenge of how to move forward is rolling white ornithologists as they debate whether to change as many as 150 eponyms, names of birds that honor people with connections to slavery and supremacy. Oh, that's what it's about. At some point in the past, people who were part of a system that the entire world was a part of, in every single culture around the world, of every single ethnic group, named some stuff. That's what this is about. Wow. Guess we have to upend the whole entire study in science and start from scratch then, right? What a bunch of nonsense. The Bachman sparrow, Wallace's fruit dove, and other winged creatures bear the names of men who fought for the Southern cause. Okay? You know, a lot of the Southerners that fought against the War of Northern Aggression did so because you were invading their homeland. These people don't tell you about the marauders that came into the South and burned down people's homes who weren't even necessarily involved in the war. Murdered and raped their families. They don't tell you about that. Burned their fields and crops. Go watch the movie Outlaw of Josie Wales. It actually, it shows that. It's probably one of the few movies that's I ever have seen that's been produced that actually shows that side in the reality of the Civil War. It's whitewashed, if you would, generally. And it's patched over because he doesn't want to get into the numerous intricate details of the system at the time, or that many people in the South, 4 times as many, were seeking abolition. And there were slaves in the North, folks. The war was not fought over slavery solely, although secession was initially largely about slavery. So, but there were many issues there. There were economic issues building up for years with tariffs and the industrialization in the North. And it was always Republicans versus Democrats. I shouldn't say that per se, because the Republicans had just built a coalition of power, if you would, their party up, which is why Lincoln was the first Republican president. But Lincoln was a tyrant, guys. Go over and watch Radical Liberation. I mentioned this yesterday with Thomas DiLorenzo, because he wrote some great books on Lincoln, and they do a great interview, and they talk about Lincoln's tyranny and how basically all the presidents model themselves after him. Because, excuse me, because great men are generally tyrants. They're always seen as tyrants and great at the same time. Tyrants by those who love liberty and great by those who love enslavement and power. So we have to understand these things. We have to understand that no one likes Calvin Coolidge unless you're a guy like me, because he was a do-nothing president. He's probably the best president we ever had. At least up until recent times. And I know Trump is full of flaws, but I mean, he did some things to fight the system. So Again, I'm not going to sit here and like, I'm not like the huge MAGA guy that's going to be, oh, Trump was the best, blah 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 blah. No, he did a lot of stupid things, but he wasn't the status quo, which made him much much better. And so every president that's trying to one up the others, you know, Obama, if he could have, would have done what Joe Biden's trying to do now, which is implement a new Green Deal. Because they do these things in phases, folks. The plans are already there. It's a matter of shifting that Overton window and waiting for the population to come around to the indoctrination. And the majority of the population has. Even people who are conservative, you'll see this a lot. Watch Don. Hopefully Don will come back soon. I sent him a text the other day. It was a inappropriate meme that I figured he would enjoy. Nothing of nudity or anything, just spicy language. In any case, and he told me he should be coming back soon, but I don't know. He did a stream the other week off camera, so hopefully he's getting better and things are resolving. But go watch Don's catalog of videos, and go watch all the conservative people, the people on the right, the liberty-minded people that he talks to. And so many of them, are using leftist-style terminologies. And I mean, I've been guilty of this. But they're like, well, I'm not a sexist. I'm not this or that. I mean, I do my little qualitative statements every now and again. You have to tell people where your positions are. Like, I say I'm an egalitarian. I am. But I also, I'm an egalitarian for those who have skin in the game. I say I'm practically an anarchist. I'm not an anarchist. I'm a minarchist, but I'm practically an anarchist because I believe Christ is my only king. So I have to put things in a certain light for you all to kind of understand where I'm coming from. And I also believe that there can be a range of things that are true all at the same time. I often get in these conversations with people in other streams where it's a group conversation. And I'm like, yeah, all your points are right. Like all these things can be happening at the same time. The world is quite complicated. We need to really understand that. In any case, as I said, Don will get on, various guests, various YouTubers, and they will walk and tread very lightly along the leftist, racist, sexist, homophobic, Islamophobic, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They do that because they've been indoctrinated, folks. It's just how it is. I was indoctrinated with feminism my entire life and didn't even realize it until I got older. And don't get me wrong, I knew and was not really, have never really been for the whole idea of feminism because I always thought of it a bit of it as a supremacy movement. But how deep that went into my psychology as far as the rhetoric, the zeitgeist that is out there in the world today, that really was in my soul to where I didn't know how to interact with women. I had to relearn how to interact with women. Now, part of this was because of my, unfortunate broken marriage, and that my ex-wife kind of destroyed my confidence in a lot of things. But it was also a matter of being in a certain socio-political environment that makes you want to walk on eggshells and be careful. So these things are important to understand. Just checking my stream everywhere real quick, guys. Let's get back to this article, though. It says, these are men who fought for the Southern cause. So basically, anyone in the South now must be eliminated. Any accomplishments of the South must be eliminated. I would like to wind this back all throughout history. And let's keep everyone accountable. Let's keep all of the slave traders accountable. Let's keep the Islamist accountable. The same people that during the Barbary Pirate Wars were taking Americans captive and other Europeans and turning them into slaves. And often when Islam did that, they made you a eunuch, folks. We can talk about the Jewish slave trade. We can talk about the slave trade, the European slave trade of the Slavic people, which is why now currently the what is it? Is it the ACLU? It's one of those crazy organizations. I don't think it's quite them. But maybe it's the Southern Poverty Law Center. It's one of those organizations. Considers Slavics to not be white anymore. We can talk about China's slave trade or Asia's in general. It's always been around, guys. It still exists today. Hillary Clinton restarted it in Libya. I mean, not single-handedly, mind you. But her policies, or her directives, if you would, caused Libya to be crushed and that to happen. And of course, we have slavery in Central America coming up into the United States today. Sex slavery and trafficking. This is all around the world, folks. It always has been. It always will be, because evil will always exist. But we got rid of it. And people moved on. And look, the Republic died back during that war and was rebirthed as some sort of tyranny. But, I don't want to go back to that time either. I would like a simpler life, but, I don't think that, having a slave trade or any of those things are a good thing. I don't think the lack of technology is a good thing. But I can tell you this. Those people were of much hardier stock than we are today, and could sustain themselves much better, and probably had a lot more camaraderie with their neighbor than any of us ever do. So those things are things that I would like to return to. It says here, they stole skulls from Indian graves for pseudoscientific studies that were later debunked. Well, yeah, that's all because of left-wing ideology, like, evolution. Now, you might call that science. I don't think so. Not with the 1,000,001 flaws that it has. But perhaps you believe in it, and that's fine. You need to understand that the idea is, over 2,000 years old, and Darwin did not come up with it. It's a very old idea, just like panspermia is. It said, and he bought and sold black people. Well, people did that. Black people bought and sold. Actually, they didn't necessarily buy them, but they hunted them down and then sold them to white men. So, am I still allowed to say that without getting yeeted, Susan? That's historically correct. Hello, Holly. I'm late and having a discussion about feminist Hoff Summers with my daughter. Christina Hoff Summers, I like her. Like Camille Paglia. They speak the truth. They just wanted to be able to go out at night by themselves, and I don't mean like in the lefty way today, because you might get raped. Well, sorry, the world is dangerous. It is. I'm a guy who's most of his life, his adult life, has surrounded himself and put himself in dangerous situations. I can tell you. Most of you are naive to the real horrors of the world. But yeah, they just wanted to be able to not have chaperones and to kind of go do their own thing and, be able to have credit cards and that kind of stuff. I'm not really sold on the credit card thing. I have to fuss at my wife about hers on occasion, so. Yes, 100% equality of opportunities. Exactly, Holly. And that's what, right, and that's the egalitarian side of me. And when I did say earlier that I'm an egalitarian, but I want you to have skin in the game, I meant that as far as, your suffrage, that is your rights to vote. Your enfranchisement, that is. Enfranchisement should be a very particular thing to give to people who are responsible enough to own it. If you're a welfare case, you can't take care of your own life, why are you able to then vote for more welfare for the government to take care of you? Why do you have any say in the operations and directions of the nation? It doesn't make much sense to me. Anyways, let's keep going with this article, because you know me, I can just ramble. Some of these men stoked violence and participated in it without consequence. Oh. You mean like when Lincoln invaded the South? Holly, if you didn't know, this article is from the Washington Post about how bird names are racist because some, uh, Southern scientists name these birds. Even John James Audubon's, I guess that's how you say it, name is fraught in a nation embroiled in a racial reckoning. That sounds like fighting words to me. And guys, there's less of you. I don't think you'll want that. I'm just going to say it flat out. I'm not advocating for any of this, of course. I'm a pacifist, but excuse me, or at least I try to be, because it's been a long time since I've did anything to anybody. But I'm saying I don't want to be in physical altercations. It's not good spiritually, psychologically, physically for anybody. I do understand, though, that it is the ultimate arbiter in the end, isn't it? At least in this material world. Long the most recognized figure in North America birding for his detailed drawings of the continent species, he was also an enslaver who mocked abolitionists working to free black people. Some of his behavior is so shameful that a 116-year-old National Audubon Society, Audubon Society, the country's premier bird conversation group with 500 local chapters, has ruled out changing its name. And Oriole, Warbler, and Shearwater all share it. So what? Are we going to get rid of algebra now because the Muslims invented it and participated in the slave trade? I know, they're the religion of peace. I'm sorry, they never did that. Never happened. It's just a myth. I've literally been told that. That's absurd. All right, you saw this one. Holly, good. Well, I do have a meme about it tonight. I want to see what Jeremy and Delaney have to say about it. So, I'm deeply troubled by the racist actions of John James and recognize how painful the legacy is for Black, Indigenous people of color who are part of our staff, volunteers, donors, and members. Although we have begun to address this part of our history, we have a lot more to unpack. So what they just said here was what Jeremy got into last night on his show, which I'm sure Holly will get to talk to them about, because Jeremy brought in someone to debate him. It was very cordial. It was very nice. There was no blood sports. Surprised. But Jeremy was talking about feminine, basically a feminine mindset, and that the world is run right now through a feminine mindset. And he's 1,000% right. And the lefty guy, I don't know if he felt insulted or not, but, I don't think he maybe even cared, but the lefty guy didn't understand Jeremy's point because he doesn't understand anything about human nature, history, what masculinity, femininity is, the fact that there's tremendous biological difference between men and women. I mean, we are more the same than we are different, but there are drastic physical differences, guys. Women have different interests. They develop more social skills than men. And that's what we're going towards, this feminization of the society. I often bring up the silver fox experiment in Russia, where they bred these animals to be docile, and then they can make them pets. It only happened within a few generations. You know what else happened? They changed the way that the foxes looked. So the question is are we breeding? As I often say, there are multiple factors here. Are we breeding more effeminate men? Are we breeding toward this feminization? And right here, we're worried about people's feelings who should be mature adults over the names of birds because, well, someone was a bad person once. Well, I can tell you that every single one of these people are probably bad people too. And so are you. And I don't say that like I don't say that to be insulting. I'm just saying no one is good. No one is good but God. That's what Christ said. Young man came to him. He said, "Don't you call me good. No one is good but God in heaven, the Father." So for the Christian, the example being Christ here on earth, God as a man, if he's saying he's not even good enough in his humanity, then what do you think you are? We all have our issues, guys. I say it all the time. I have my sins. I have my faults, my flaws. It is better to talk about them and get them out there and try and grow than it is to hide them and bury them. But that's on an individual level. As far as the society goes, we're going to rename and reclassify an entire science because of someone's hurt feelings? That is a little temper tantrum child behavior of people who aren't socialized. That's the kid that wants to change the rules of the games that no other kids want to play with because he can never lose the game. Or she. Though typically I find that it's males that do such a thing. Holly said, or Dalhuck said, yes, Al-Jabbar is the devil. There goes the names and the stars and our numbers. Arabic, you're right. That's right. Yeah, well, before that, I mean, when we use Roman numerals, they had slaves. We're supposed to get rid of our alphabet too. Um, Language, if I'm not mistaken, other than Sumerian, a lot of our language came through Phoenician. All those people had slaves. Are we supposed to get rid of language and writing? Should we even read anymore? We should just remake the entire structure of everything. Because you're not a grown-up adult. And your feelings are hurt about things that never happened to you. And in fact, the things that happened to those people, I'm not saying was good for those people, or even successive generations of folks who were brought to America as slaves, because it certainly wasn't. But you aren't in Africa, I can tell you that. It's really funny when I listen to someone, I haven't in forever. When I listen to someone, though, I see a clip of someone like Trevor Noah, who grew up in South Africa, talks about living under apartheid and all of the issues there. Right? And then he talks about America's racism. Like, dude, what is wrong with you? You moved to America from a country where you say your mom and dad couldn't even walk down the street together. Nor you with, I forget which, I think his mom was black and his dad was white. I think. I don't recall. This is just utter nonsense. Trevor Noah came to America to get rich, and he knew he was going to be rich, and he's got a regular gig that's easy for him, and his politics are completely disaligned with his life. You know, I've mentioned it before. I talked to a guy several years back who, in a bar, randomly met from South Africa, and he was telling me he was really worried about all the stuff going on today. And again, this is pre-Trump, guys. This is pre-Trump. But I'm one who's aware. I should have been doing this YouTube thing or streaming thing a long time ago, but life, I wanted to. Didn't get around to it. But he was saying that that he grew up through that, and this guy was older. He was in his late 50s. He grew up through that, and he's seen America go down that exact same route. That should tell you something, folks. The concept of zero, yeah, I think that is Arab, isn't it? Well, no, the Greeks should have came up with that beforehand. I mean, the Greeks had great math as well. But yeah, and it's just ridiculous. Like the Western world, all Western nations are based in Roman nations, guys. And that's the reality. That's why even the Eastern empires, such as the continuation of in Russia, they're called the King Tsar. That's just the Russian word, the Rus word for Caesar. We use the word czar today in our offices. I don't know why. Go down to DC, though, and go look at all the buildings and how Romanesque they are and all the Romanesque art. It pays homage to our lineage. We know that's where we come from. Kizza said on the stream the other week that our culture is English. Yes, American culture is English, at least originally. But the English culture is Roman. And yeah, I know there's a lot more to the English culture than just the occupation of Britain by the Romans. I understand that there were Vikings and other groups. There were the Picts, basically the Scots. There are the Celts, all that stuff, or Celts, however it's pronounced, wherever you're from. We have the Franks, where we get France from now, right? There were a lot of movement of these people, but all of that landmass of Europa, and I know the British Isles are not part of Europa, or they don't consider themselves, but you understand what I'm saying. The landmass of Europe was occupied by Rome, and Roman thought spread throughout that world. It didn't occupy eventually the Middle East, right? Byzantium went out that way, but they were eventually taken over. It didn't occupy the Far East. They had a different way. But the Western world, very much Roman. And that brings me to hailing Caesar. Let's see. I actually might want to let's see with the dark mode. Yeah, much better. I think it's another reason why I have trouble, being very tired yesterday, but I have trouble reading the Politics of Obedience is because not easy on the eyes with the big white screen, but... So this is a brief history of Julius Caesar, and as I started this, I wanted to talk about it just because here we have the rising of a tyrant who also did good things. And again, this is the idea of the great man. And people will praise him, or the liberty-minded people will know what he was. And of course, he was conspired against, which was foolish. Not foolish because the people conspired against him weren't trying to, return Rome to its republic. It was foolish because he wielded so much power, and his nephew was his heir. And his nephew was a great military man like his uncle. So, like I said, I've forgotten a lot of this stuff because I read it so many years ago. I was like 16, 17 in Latin class, and I forgot about little things like the Great Triumvirate, or the First Triumvirate, and all of that. So I just kind of want to go through the details. This article isn't that long, but I want you to listen to this, right? Understand that 2,000 years ago, Caesar came to power when he crossed the Rubicon, and yet his behavior and actions are no different than any other character that has come to declare themselves the omniscient king of any land. It says he's born into an aristocratic, there we go. He was born into an aristocratic family in around 100 BC. So first off, his family was powerful and had wealth, right? There's a theme here, guys, about elites. Even if people don't come from wealth, often when they get it, they then think that they have some sort of special gift to tell you what to do. Caesar grew up in a dangerous time. Rome could not yet handle its own size and power. This is before the Pax Romana. That is the Roman peace. The nobility were widely discredited and order had given way to chaos. The only clear alternative was military dictatorship. Was it? That's what people were talking about today. Now, I don't think so. It's a bit silly. Excuse me, guys. I had I had to clear my throat there. All right. Caesar allied himself against the nobility. As his career took off, he won a number of political offices, not always by reputable means. By 63 BC, he had become a well known but controversial figure. Viva España. Despite his notoriety, he was appointed governor of Father Spain. This was a lucrative position because it offered him the chance to plunder the local inhabitants at will. He returned to Rome in 60 BC and the following year was elected consul, the highest office in the Republic. Now holding real power, Caesar allied himself with two key people, Pompey and Crassus. Pompey was a war hero who had been badly treated by the Senate. And this was the mistake of the Senate, is they were not treating their vets well. Again, does this sound familiar or parallel anything that you might believe is going on in the world today? Pompey was a war hero who had been badly treated by the Senate, while Crassus was a multi-millionaire. The two men were rivals, but Caesar was able to bridge the gap between them, and the three men formed the powerful First Triumvirate. I predict a riot. As consul, Caesar wanted to pay off Pompey's soldiers by allocating them public lands, meaning he was going to do them a solid, right, knowing that it would buy him loyalty. Isn't this interesting how politicians, now these were military folks, and military folks were politicians because this was part of how the Roman system worked. But isn't it, but they weren't elected, at least not by the people. They could be appointed by the Senate and whatnot, but not by the people. But isn't it interesting how he bribed the soldiers, like people were bribed with, cakes and circuses, welfare, all that good stuff. It's almost like these things are universal themes that humanity's been struggling with forever. This was unpopular, so to get the measure through, he engineered a riot and used the chaos to get his own way. He then used his power to secure the governorship of Gaul, modern-day France, and Belgium. Gaul gave Caesar a power base to recruit soldiers and conduct the military campaigns that would make his name and secure his fortune. So in order to get power, Caesar engineered a riot. So first he wanted to give away a bunch of public lands to the soldiers, the people that would fight for him, that would gain him loyalty, that were useful to him. And he gave him free stuff. But people weren't going to let that free stuff be given away easily. So in order to get his way, he just like, you know what? Let's start a riot. And then they'll have to listen and they'll let me do this. Does any of this sound familiar? Between 58 and 50 BC, Caesar used his expertise in military strategy, along with the Roman army's training and discipline, to conquer and subdue the rest of Gaul, up to the river Rhine. When battling foreign enemies, Caesar was ruthless, besieging rebels in what is now the Dordogne part of France. He waited until their water supply ran out and then cut off the hands of all the survivors. Okay. I mean, the guy's ruthless, right? Ruthless. In a life of military training and war and of a mindset that might makes right will make you this way. And the Romans very much were all about power. This is why homosexuality wasn't a big deal in Rome, because it wasn't about, for them more morally, if someone was straight or gay, but it was about the power you were exerting over folks, right? Under the threat back home, He now turned his attention back home. His triumvirate was badly strained. Pompey was increasingly jealous of Caesar's success, and Crassus still hated Pompey. After Crassus was killed in battle, Pompey and Caesar drifted apart, ultimately finding themselves on opposing sides. By now, Caesar was very successful, but he had many enemies and found his position and his life under threat. He believed that the only way he could protect himself was by seizing power. In January 49 BC, he led his troops across the Rubicon into Italy and started civil war. Caesar scored some early victories, and by 46 BC, was dictator of Rome. I like that PBS put dictator, not emperor. After a year spent eliminating his remaining enemies, he returned home. Generous in victory, he was kind to his defeated rivals, giving them all amnesties and even inviting some to join him in government. Yet his position remained insecure. Without a son of his own, he needed an heir. Caesar quickly adopted his great-nephew, Augustus. He also moved fast to strengthen the northern borders of the empire and tackle its enemies in the east. At home, he reformed the Roman calendar, tackled local government, resettled veterans into new cities, made the Senate more representative, and granted citizenship to many more foreigners. From my understanding, though, the Senate was vestigial under the empire. They basically handled they handled the duties of getting the things done that Caesar said get done. It's kind of like sort of how we're going in the U.S. with the executive branch basically being the monarch and the legislature writing laws that don't really matter because the monarch can at any point change the laws through executive order. Or, of course, they just do it through the court. Anyways, it says, beware the Ides of March, but his rule would be cut short. Old enemy joined forces with some of his supporters, fed up with his dictatorial style. On March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Caesar was assassinated in the Senate. Although his own rule was unremarkable, his victory in the Civil War replaced a republic ruled by the consuls and the Senate with an empire reigned over by emperors and their hereditary successors. It was the start of a brand new age for Rome. And the Ides of March is interesting because according to the histories of this, he saw a soothsayer, a seer, and particularly a special kind who read divinations through the organs of animals. And when that happened, the Ides of March came, and Caesar was going to the theater, and he saw the soothsayer, and he said, the Ides of March have come. And the soothsayer said, but not gone yet, Caesar. And he was later murdered. Stabbed to death. Even his best friend Brutus stabbed him. And this, my friends, is what empire always brings. It brings the Game of Thrones. But I found that, just as a brief history, a reminder, a refresher of this guy basically being very ambitious to seek power in the beginning. Now, back then, might making right and murdering people, that was no big deal. Just murder people left and right if you want. No biggie. Now, granted, there were laws, so it was a big deal in that, yes, you could not be violating the law. But a Roman soldier could kill anybody, basically. Anybody who was not a Roman citizen. There was no law against them in doing such a thing. The Roman citizens, they had rights to trial and those things, and we can see this in the scriptures when Paul the Apostle uses his Roman citizenship fact, he might have been the only Roman citizen of the early Bible that we're really aware of the apostles. Or sorry, the New Testament scriptures. I don't know why I said early Bible, but because there's no guarantee that any of the other apostles were. Just because you lived in the territory of Rome does not mean that you were a citizen. And it just said there that Caesar expanded citizenship to a lot of foreigners, but often to get citizenship, if you were a foreigner, you had to go serve in the military. A contract with the Roman military was 20 years. And when you were done, you might have citizenship then, if you lived. So they paid the high price, and they required skin in the game, that's for sure. So Holly says, et tu, Brute? And you, Brutus. From the play Julius Caesar. You know, I was talking yesterday, I said I hadn't ever really gotten into European history till I took AP History as a senior, AP European History. That actually wasn't true, because I got it in my Latin class. And obviously you get a little bit of history before that, but it might be like English or whatever, where we come from, like American history. But yeah, nothing like the depths that the European history got into, because we're covering several thousand years up until the Renaissance, if I'm not mistaken. Basically from the Roman Empire to the Renaissance. So you're talking 1,500 years plus 1,600 years, whenever you want to, and we can debate about when the Renaissance started, because there are debates about that. But I believe Brunelleschi's dome is the is it Brunelleschi? I can't recall his name. He's the first guy to build a dome in like 1,000 years, because they forgot the technology. They forgot how to do it. So that really was one of the markers as far as the public works and arts projects. Let me check chat real quick here. Chat's kind of bare today. It's all right. I mean, it's fine. You guys are listening. It's just like a light crew today. Maybe after yesterday, that stream was so bad, no one's ever going to come back. I jest, guys, and honestly, not even that big a deal. I still don't know what happened yesterday, unless it was just straight OBS, because my interwebs should have been fine. But in any case, let's watch some of this. Let's watch a little bit of this, about 10 minutes or so. It's about where we left off. And if you don't recall, this is the Jesus of Testimony. Some more history. And then we'll get into the Naked Communist. And we'll finish with the politics of political obedience, which we're nearly done, folks. It's only like 80 pages, and we're on page 68. So let's see here.
Sometimes they'll tell, say, a parable of Jesus or a story about Jesus from the Gospels. And
once again, folks, if there's an issue with the volume or something, please say something in the chat so I can fix it. I am listening through my system. I'm not tech savvy enough to have all the stuff to set up to listen to the playback on the stream. And even to do that, I mean, yeah, I could plug in some headphones or something. But even to do that is a little weird, because I have to wait with the lag.
Then the next day, the children, little kids, would repeat it, having heard it once, verbatim. It's a different mindset with the coming of the printing press and how that's impacted Western civilization. And now with the internet, our ability to memorize has shrunk dramatically. But these Middle Eastern cultures and the ancient cultures, and especially ancient Jewish culture, learned how to memorize and lived by memorization extensively.
You had people, uneducated people. Some people say this is only the literate. No, you had uneducated bards who couldn't maybe read or write, but they could recite all of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey from memory. You had educated people who could perform feats that we would consider phenomenal. One guy went into an auction and listened to every item that was sold, and at the end of the day, he could repeat back every item that was sold, the price for which it was sold, the person to whom it was sold, without using any notes. Another person went to a poetry recitation, heard the poem being recited, and as the person finished the poem, the guy in the back said, "Hey, that's plagiarism. That's my poem. You stole my poem." And the guy up front was like, well, he was embarrassed because he didn't know what to say, because the guy had been reading the poem, didn't know it from memory. The guy in the back, he said, "I can repeat it from memory," and he repeated it from memory. And then he said, just joking. I just wanted to show you how good my memory is. So there were people who could memorize things as they were hearing them. Incredible feats of memory. But memory was particularly emphasized in academic settings, from elementary settings on up.
For example, the rabbis would recite a lesson, and their students that were being trained in the rabbinic schools had to recite the same exact words sometimes 500 times before they could go on to the next lesson. So there's very strong demands on the oral performance of the students.
Disciples of teachers were supposed to remember what their teachers taught them. They could pool their memories afterwards, and often did. If the disciples of Jesus did not accurately remember the substance of a lot of his teaching, that's not saying they remembered every detail, but if they didn't accurately remember the substance of his teaching, they were quite unlike what we would expect for any disciples in the first century. It seems far more likely, based on all the evidence we have, Jewish evidence, Greek and Roman evidence, all the evidence we have from antiquity. There are areas where we don't have evidence, but we have a whole lot of evidence, and you put it all together, it suggests these people would remember things.
Many reasons could be given for the delay of the written Gospels, but even thinking about this question in these terms is perhaps considering it from the wrong perspective. Because oral proclamation of the Gospel was paramount in the apostles' earliest motives, it might be better to ask, why were the Gospels written at all?
The Gospels were not written immediately after the ascension of Jesus, and there are a number of reasons why that is the case. Perhaps the most important is that these early disciples believed that Jesus would come back very, very soon, imminently, at any moment, and so the parousia, or the coming of Christ, was prominent in their minds, and consequently they did not want to put into written form the stories of Jesus. They were spreading the news about him to the entire ancient Mediterranean world, so much so that the news got to Rome within 15 years, and the emperor had to kick out the Jews because they were causing all sorts of problems with the Christians because they were following one named Christus, or Christos, or Christ, that is. And so there was this strong oral tradition due to the impulse of evangelism and mission that kept them from wanting to reduce it to writing. As soon as you reduce it to writing, you are assuming that this has to last beyond that generation and affect the next group, typically. And only after a couple of decades did they come to realize Jesus might not return soon, and consequently they would have to reduce this to writing.
We believe that there never was a purely oral tradition. Much like the orally oriented world of the ancient world, all over the place, there was an interesting mixture of dominantly oral, but some literary weavings within that. Luke is a highly educated, very competent person with regard to first century literacy, and we have no reason to believe that others like Luke weren't involved in this movement from quite early on. Even if we just take Matthew as reflective of the kind of people that could be in Jesus' early movement, someone like Matthew working as a tax collector would have had to have a trade literacy to be able to keep books and things like that. And, not surprisingly, the Christian tradition claims that Matthew from very early on wrote notes about Jesus and his teachings. The whole category of notebooks is something that we now know was a live option for people in the first century. So we now have historical precedent and actual literary evidence coming together that that's what was going on in some of the early Jesus context.
We have traced the oral tradition behind the Gospels to the written Gospels and have seen that they are reliable as eyewitness testimony to the person and work of Jesus. But what if the copies of those written Gospels were corrupted and the original text was lost in translation?
Depending on who you talk with, there are all kinds of objections to reliability of the Gospels, but some of the more commonly heard ones include, hasn't the Bible been copied so many times and then translated into so many different versions that we simply don't have any confidence as to what the writers originally said or meant? And usually that kind of a question comes from people who really aren't aware of the thousands of manuscripts available and the kinds of variants and differences, most of which are extremely minuscule, that one finds among them.
The number of New Testament manuscripts that we have today is a vast quantity.
As of August 2013, the grand total of Greek New Testament manuscripts stands at 5,838. This is more than 1,000 times the manuscript data for the New Testament than for the average Greco-Roman author.
That's so incredible. It's almost incomprehensible when you compare it to any other ancient literature. That comes to more than 2.6 million pages of manuscripts. It's a huge amount. That's just in Greek. Then we have the New Testament, because of the evangelistic motives of the early Christians to spread the gospel in areas where Greek was not the primary language. The New Testament got translated into Latin, into Syriac, into Coptic, into Georgian, Gothic, Armenian, Ethiopic. We have thousands of copies in those languages. We don't know the exact number. They have not yet been tabulated. In Latin alone, we have more than 10,000 copies of the New Testament, handwritten copies of the New Testament, that started to get translated in the 2nd century when the gospel spread west. In Syriac, hundreds, perhaps even a couple thousand. Same with Coptic. Our best guess on these versions, our best conservative guess on these versions, is that we have at least 15,000 handwritten copies.
The very best classical author in terms of existing manuscript copies is Homer. Manuscripts of Homer number less than 2,400, compared to the New Testament manuscripts that are approximately 10 times that amount when translations in other languages are included.
Now, when you look at all this material, you say, okay, you got 5,000, almost 6,000 for the Greek New Testament, and you got maybe 15,000 for these other languages. Surely those manuscripts aren't complete. That is correct. There's only 60 complete Greek New Testament manuscripts that have Matthew through Revelation without any gaps because they haven't fallen out somehow. However, the average Greek New Testament manuscript, the average is more than 450 pages long. And so you start multiplying these copies. We have the whole New Testament reproduced in these manuscripts hundreds and hundreds of times over.
So that 450 pages is, you saying it's not just a little fragment. That often is the argument. It's just not true. That it's just a little scrap. Now, we do have fragments of manuscripts. Another thing is that, and they get into it in this video, is that there are, we can actually recreate the whole New Testament based on the early church fathers. The Ante-Nicene fathers alone, if I'm not mistaken, have quoted the entire New Testament. If you haven't seen before, it's right here. Looking around for it. If you haven't seen before, if you don't know, this is a singular book from one of the early church fathers. Irenaeus, Saint Irenaeus, has he be referred to in the Catholic or Orthodox faith. But he was a direct disciple of Polycarp. Now, I mentioned Polycarp yesterday because he was a direct disciple of John the Apostle, who was probably one of the youngest apostles. And in many traditions, was the only apostle never to suffer martyrdom. So kind of an interesting little tidbit there. So real quick, I'm going to write down what the time was on this. And guys, I mentioned Polycarp yesterday in the stream and the issue over Easter, and he was for it because he was in the West, keeping Easter, or not Easter, but Passover, as in on the Jewish holiday. That's how they kept it. This was, toward the end of the 2nd century, but the church in the West wanted to put it on Easter, and I mentioned this in the context of synods that came out of the church some centuries later, and basically forbidding Christians from worshiping on the original Jewish day of Passover. And that's important because, again, when I often talk about the church corruption and getting away from things, these are the things I'm talking about. And to the point, unless I misread the synod, it's to the point that they were basically saying, oh, you worship on this day, we'll excommunicate you, meaning you can no longer worship within our church. That's pretty harsh, picking over a day, especially when the scriptures, specifically, Paul the Apostle says that you shouldn't argue over days and feasts and new moons. That some men honor every day the same and others a specific day. Talks about food in this way and whatever else. But, I don't know. It's just a perspective. So, I'm going to get pulled up here, but let's read some of, the Naked Communist. And, if you guys hadn't figured yet, I got to play these videos, take my little breaks, because I got to eat. I got to eat at some point. Often I don't eat till later, till like 5 or 6, but it helps with the stream if I get a little bit of food in. Helps me maintain my cognitive abilities, much like sleep does. That thing I don't get too much of. So if you recall, yesterday we covered this, and I did this on part 2 of the stream after my stream crashed for inexplicable reasons. But this is where it was going. This was the next place. And this is from the Naked Communist, Leon Skoltson. I think that's how you say his name. I don't know. But just look up Naked Communist. There's also the Naked Socialist, which I have a copy of. Perhaps we'll look at later. I believe his son wrote that. So these are American patriots that are definitely very much against these things infiltrating the government and taking over our society. And as I mentioned often when I reference this, he has a list of 50 some odd points that I've covered before in the BLM video I made a long time ago, last year. It's my first rather successful video, actually. So there's about 50 points that he read on the House floor of Congress into their records of the communist active measures, their goals. And maybe I'll bring them up real quick a little bit later, right after this. You'll see how many of them are already implemented in the United States. And there's also the fact that the communists have basically implemented every one of the 10 planks of the manifesto. Now, again, this was an interesting thing last night listening to Jeremy, so hopefully I'll have a good conversation with him tonight about it. But this guy was talking about Scandinavian countries. Scandinavian countries, if you look on the freedom of economic, if you look at fees, what is it? Well, I forget what fee stands for, but if you look at the economic index, several places do this, but I think fee probably has the best stats on this. You'll see that most Scandinavian countries are actually more free market and freer than we are. Like, people like to talk about Sweden. Now, I'm not saying Sweden doesn't have problems. Obviously, they've had an immigration issue with people they're calling refugees who are just migrants. But if you look at a nation like them, they got away from socialism in the 80s and 90s because they were bankrupting everybody. Their pension systems, their social security, if you would, that's the parallel here in the United States. That pension system is privatized. The Swedish people get to pick what schools their children go to, and that those schools get money from the government. Here, they won't allow that. No school choice. If we're going to make that a public thing, which I don't think we should, but I understand the need, or some need for it, having a public option at least for school, much like a public option, like a basic level of healthcare. I can understand you could make an argument for that. I don't fully agree with it morally, ethically, but I could see in an advanced society being able to do that. What is the issue with school choice here? You know, someone, I think it was running for Congress here recently. Is that what it was? It might have been local, something local for the school board or something else. I can't recall. That was probably it. Someone running for the school board. They were over in Jefferson County. And they were like, when I saw that the Republicans were pushing for school choice, that was it. I knew I had to act. You mean the locals were wanting to have choice with their children and push freedom of choice to not be put into indoctrination centers? Like, you got to be a special kind of something to think that that's a evil thing. And I'm not even going to say stupid, because I don't know that that individual is stupid at all. Authoritarian, for sure. They might not be stupid in any way, shape, or form. They just know that you're getting away from the indoctrination. But yeah, like same with Denmark. They're very free market. Denmark has some things with their, their nationalized oil system. But it's not like everyone is getting UBI based on that. And in fact, the Scandinavian countries that have implemented UBI stopped implementing UBI. There's a reason, because people didn't want to work. And you can't have anything happen in the economy unless people take action, which is why Ludwig von Mises named his treatise on economics Human Action. Because humans sitting on their butt and not doing anything, trying to collect stuff, well, in the reality of thing, in a world of entropy, in a world that's material, physical that is, and you need to labor to get those things, as God said he would curse the earth, that man would have to till and work the ground. In that kind of world, everything just falls apart when you sit around and don't take care of things. When you don't hustle, guys, you got to hustle. And I'm not saying that you got to hustle 24/7. You don't have to work all the time. You can work part-time. I don't care. Do what you feel is necessary, but don't leech. And if you're going to leech, you can make an argument that I'm a leech right now. If you're going to leech, do it in a manner that you're not actually leeching. You're actually being productive inside of the system. And I always say, though, I don't feel that way in any way, shape, or form, because I was working. I came to my relationship with my wife with some money in the bank. I also came into it with a house and furniture and a lot of stuff that she did not have. So it's a fair trade, and I'm bringing my leadership, and I'm going to help her raise our children when I have experience raising children. So it's a pretty good win for her, in my opinion. And it's not full time. It's not always. It's temporary. And neither one of us need to work outside of the home, which is, by the way, guys, traditional. Outside of city life, the reality is the majority of folks don't work outside of the house. Like throughout history, they have to work around the house and the farm or whatever else. But if you even went to a cobbler in a city, his home was probably in the back of the shop or above it, right? You went to the blacksmith. His home was probably at his business. We've done this weird thing where we've skewed these things and split them apart. So now we outsource everything. We've over-divided the division of labor so that we no longer have personal connections to our children and our wives and our families. Look, the divorce rate's high for numerous reasons, but why do you think the divorce rate's so high when you barely spend time with your families and your spouse? Everything's all about money and getting rich. And then that's the number one thing couples fight about. They don't build anything together, and then they go off to have temptation in the workplace. And I mean that. I used to work at a hospital. Now, there wasn't like a ton of like hot nurses or whatever, but there were freaking hot girls there, man, working. And the guys that I worked with, the security guys, were all about it. Not all of them. Some of them were married and faithful guys, but a lot of them were all about it. Even some of the married ones. Go talk to some EMTs and see how their sex life is, or people that are volunteer firefighters. People are crazy. They don't care if they're married or not. It's a free-for-all. Military is the same way. And I'm not saying that having men and women integrated in the workforce makes that happen. What I'm saying is that we're not guarding things, that these are changes in our society that are drastic and different. Men and women have worked together in fields before. But often we worked in the home or around the home or near the home, depending on how large the community we were in. And your specialty, your shop was at your home. The main reason to have a town in the early days, at least of America, is to have a little financial center so the rest of the community can come in and you have the shops and the centralization there. And then we don't have to drive, walk, ride in your buggy, whatever, all over, the earth to get somewhere, to find stuff. It's a little easier now with automobiles, right? Just some things to consider. The Communist Manifesto. During November 1847, word came from London that the Federation of the Just, later known as the Communist League, wanted Marx and Engels to participate in the Schools Congress as representatives of the Communist Manifesto, organizers in Brussels. Marx and Engels not only attended the Congress, but practically took it over by staying up most of the night, laying their plans, and by using shrewd strategy at each of their meetings, they succeeded in getting the Congress to adapt all of their basic views. Marx and Engels were commissioned to write a declaration of principles, or a manifesto to the world. They returned to Brussels and immediately set to work, with Marx pouring into the text his passionate plea for a revolution. Sorry, guys, if I'm reading staccato, it's because I need to clear my throat, and I just did. If you're not watching, you're listening on audio, I turned off my mic. I've been trying to be more cognitive of that, so I'm not coughing into it or whatever else. When they were through, they had announced to mankind that new program of international communism stood for the overthrow of capitalism, the abolition of private property, so you're a slave, right? No property means slavery. End of argument. I'm sure someone will go, but Bill, if you have property, you're a slave to the property. No, I can let my property rot or fall apart or whatever. I'm not attached to it in that way. But the society allowing me to even possess it and own it and have ownership of it and not just be able to take it away from me means that I have agency. If society doesn't allow me to possess and own it and can take it away from me, then I have no agency, and that means I'm a slave. Pretty simple. The elimination of the family as a social unit. The abolition of all classes. And that'll never happen because you can't abolish differences in people. I mean, you could if we want to go the Harrison Bergeron route. Maybe we should read that tomorrow. It's a quick read. I have read it on here before, but my wife didn't like the way I did it because I did it kind of like a radio play, and I guess she didn't like the voices I used. So I think I privated it. But yeah, Harrison Bergeron's a really quick read, and it's the only way that you can abolish all classes because people are different. I'm short. Are we going to get rid of the class of tall people? Bill, that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about wealth and money. Okay, but what are we doing today? We're now talking. We've exchanged all of this because none of this was true and didn't work out. It's been disproven. We've replaced all of this with wokeness, intersectionality, critical race theory. You know, critical race theory comes from legal scholarship, but it's being used and manipulated today. So now there are people, PSA Adam and Sitch had on the other day, who are arguing that that's not critical race theory that's being taught. In a technical sense, sure. But you're basically saying the same thing as, you know, well, the communism, you know, that wasn't real communism. It's no true Scotsman. And I know just a minute ago I gave you an either or and kind of fallacy of that this is the way it is. But there are certain things that are black and white in this world, folks. I mean, I'm not going to get into all the different various logical fallacies, but the no true Scotsman one here is very important. Either ors are sometimes it. So, or if then, as it can be stated, but I don't think that these are, you know, a choice between A and B or a false dichotomy or any of those things when we're talking about property and freedom. Either ethics are very, very black and white. You cannot just deny the moral culpability of one person using force upon another to keep them from owning something. And in the end, it doesn't work. And the reason why it doesn't work is because, well, people don't put in their fair share. What you do is you end up subsidizing laziness. And actually, this is a truth. You want to talk about slavery, folks. You know, I'm using the term slavery for communism, but just go look at American slavery in the South. Go look at how no one was educated. Purposely, it was against the law. Now, some slaves were taught to read and write and whatever else, but illegally. They weren't allowed to own property. They weren't really generally allowed to marry. They often, though, very often, were seen as lazy. And it's not, I don't think it's because of the race or ethnicity of the slaves. I think they were seen as lazy is because that's what slavery produces. Go look at the Soviet Union. And John Stossel has a video he made about going to the Soviet Union in the 80s and going to a restaurant and waiting around for like an hour and a half before anyone even took his order. Because as the old Soviet joke goes, they pretend to pay us and we pretend to work. So again, I just want to be clear about that. I'm not making any sort of false dichotomies here or anything like that. This is how it works out. I can certainly back up the logic of any argument that I make. And if I make a fallacy or something, I'll come back and I'll correct it. But to me, we just got to look at the evidence. And the evidence points to you can't own any property, then you're not a free man. The overthrow of all government. Yeah, you can't. That'll never happen because the tenets of the Communist Manifesto are to bring up a tyrannical government first to get communism to start. So you think the tyrannical government's just going to give up its power? This is fundamentally why Marx was a moron. Like, I don't know. I've never read anything of Marx that spurred an idea in me and went like, wow, this guy's like really smart or genius. I must worship him like a god now, and everything he says is. How can you, it says overthrow all governments, but that was to bring up, the revolution, to bring about the strong man, the dictator, and then the government's supposed to cede its power away. How is that ever going to happen? When does that ever happen? Once you volunteer yourself for slavery, you're going to find yourself stuck in slavery. The abolition of private property, the elimination of the family as a social unit. I missed that one, or maybe I didn't. That's an important one. No, that was in Patrice Garza's Black Lives Matters website for a while, as she's a trained Marxist. The establishment of a communist order with communal ownership of property and a classless, stateless society. Well, how do you establish something and communal ownership and enforce it without a state? They're just fundamentally illogical statements. Someone has to use force in order to enforce these things. Otherwise, one person will go, well, you know what? I know we're supposed to share with all, but I'm going to take my stuff and go. And who gets to dictate who gets to eat more than others? My daughter, she's tiny. She eats like a bird. I don't eat as big as I used to. I just can't. But I eat pretty big when I'm hungry. My wife, she eats bigly. And I don't even mean because she's pregnant. I don't know where she puts it because she's pretty lean. But my wife likes to eat food. And that's great. That's fine. But my point is we all have different needs in that. Some people are vegans. Some people want to eat meat. Now, I know the commies today would make us all be vegan. But that's primarily because, again, they're not very bright. And a lot of them who are vegans aren't very bright because they're vegans. You're stuck in that mindset. I mean, if you guys can do it and you're healthy, it's fine. But I'm not really known them. The establishment of communist order with communal ownership of property in a classless society, stateless society. And again, if you're going to overthrow the government, how are you going to organize and maintain any of this stuff without a government and without a state? To accomplish this, the Communist Manifesto was crystal clear as to the course to be taken. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against existing social conditions. Let the ruling class tremble at a communist revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries unite. And that never happened. The prediction was 100% wrong. You could say, well, maybe it wasn't long enough on the timeline. Well, perhaps. Seems like to me the workers aren't the ones revolting. It's all a bunch of champagne socialists like Marx and Engels. It's like Caesar coming in to free the people by making himself a dictator. The interesting thing with this, too, is that Stalin, he knew this. He understood this. Let's go back here a little bit. He knew that the working classes were not going to revolt, and then it was his duty, Stalin and Lenin, actually. Lenin really started this, but it was their duty as the elites to make the working class do this. And that's where we've been at with this. From the time that Marx wrote this down until today, it is always the same. It is the folks saying it is my duty as, what's his name? Who's the twink Crowder got in trouble for insulting? You know who I'm talking about. Used to work for Vice or whatever it was, or BuzzFeed. What did he used to work for? You guys know what I'm talking about. Carlos Maza, that's his name. Came to mind. that guy lives in Beverly Hills or something like that. His parents are quite wealthy, like multi-millionaire, 100 millionaires. Will never have to worry about money in his life as long as he doesn't do stupid things with his money. From what I understand, Vosh lives out there. You know the old Voldemort? Champagne socialist. Who's the TikTok girl from the other week? I played over on the Justify the Memes. Everyone saw that. Her $2 million apartment. All of her cars. Before that, she was like, eat the rich. Always, folks. It's always champagne socialists. Let's say Patrice Garza. It was whatever Garza. It's Patrice Cullors. Patrice Cullors, folks, has bought 4 homes. But they're for her family. It's okay that she takes care of her family, but it's not okay that you take care of yours. This is a grift of power, and it always has been, and it always will be. And I can tell you, those in power do not live like the plebs. They do not live like the serfs. They do not live like the slave class. They live like kings because that's what they are. In the end, when it comes down to it, we are talking about, we can talk about the differences of how political systems work, but when it comes down to it, Tank says this often. It's like the Machiavellians. And I actually have that book here on Kindle. I'd like to read some of it with you guys in the future. The whole point of that book is everything comes down to power. Who's in control of the power? And no matter what, it's always the same throughout history with human beings. So we should be wary of having power consolidated and given over to folks. Let's see. I'll read another little section of this and then we'll keep moving on. I know I'm talking through the majority of this. We're like 2 pages in, but hey, it's how it goes. It's how it goes with me, right? The Revolution of 1848, the red glare of revolution, came much sooner than either Marx or Engels had anticipated. In February 1848, while the ink on the Communist Manifesto was still dry, the revolutionary spirit of the French proletariat, united with the resentment of the bourgeoisie against Louis Philippe, and the violent uprising ensued, which drove the emperor from the country. Immediately afterwards, a provisional government was set up, which included members of the Communist League, who promptly summoned Marx to Paris. Marx was flushed with excitement when he arrived at the French capital, armed with full authority from the Communist League headquarters to set up an international headquarters in Paris and to engineer the revolutions in other countries from there. Now, this is all interesting because this, we know later on, now they have their roots in the Frankfurt School, but later on the postmodernists came out of here. And again, we have the French Revolution. French go around, they say that they invented democracy, which is, of course, absurd, but there ain't anything that they invented. It's just always been around. But more than anything, what I see is they like revolution. They like civil war. And they like government entitlements. They like authoritarians. At least in recent history. You know why they do? Because human beings do. Human beings do. They say otherwise, but most of them, they're just sheep. They want to be slaves. They want to be taken care of. They want to be infantilized. They don't have any dignity. If you need, there's no lack of dignity in needing help, right? There's another thing, though, when you're asking not for help, but to be an adult, to be taken care of. And people become enslaved as they lose their dignity because they never learn to help themselves. This is also why, folks, with your children, you should let them do as much as they can when they can. Give them choices as soon as possible. Always provide them a chance for dignity, and do not baby them and wait on them hand and foot, or you will create a narcissistic monster. Marx learned that the intoxicating success of the uprising in France had induced the radical element in the provisional government to send legions into surrounding countries. Their purpose was to launch an uprising in each country and build the revolution into one magnificent conflagration. Although this was precisely what Marx had been advocating for several years, he suddenly sensed that such a campaign at the present moment might backfire and cause them to lose the support of the masses in those countries where legions were sent. Nevertheless, the plan was adopted, and the first legions were marched off to Germany. Marx soon followed and began publishing a revolutionary periodical in his native tongue called the Rheinischen Zeitung. Oh, my German's bad. The revolutionary leader soon discovered that Marx was a propaganda liability. This became painfully evident when he was sent with the other members of the Communist League to organize the workers in the Rhine Valley. Marx, when asked to address the German Democratic Congress, badly bungled this golden opportunity. He badly bungled it because he was a genius. He was the greatest genius ever, folks. Karl Schuser says, I was eager to hear the words and wisdom that would, I suppose, fall into the lips of so celebrated a man. I was greatly disappointed. What Marx said was unquestionably weighty, logical, and clear. But never have I seen anyone whose manner was more insufferably arrogant. He would not give me a moment's consideration to any opinion that differed from his own. Kind of like when you talk to someone who says they're an advocate of CRT and you just need to listen. You just need to listen to my wokeness. You white person. You need to listen because I'm oppressed. He treated with open contempt everyone who contradicted him. Those whose feelings he had wounded by his offensive manner were inclined to vote in favor of everything which ran counter to his wishes. Far from winning new adherents, he repelled many who might have been inclined to support him. Very charismatic fellow. From the beginning, the revolution of Germany had been anemic, and by May 16, 1849, it had reached a state of inglorious collapse. Marx was given 24 hours to quit the country. He stayed just long enough to borrow funds and print the last edition of his paper in red ink, and then hastened away to find refuge in France. Now here, by the way, folks, just a reference back, a call back. When he went to France, they were talking about the overthrow of the government. They were talking about the February Revolution. The Communist Manifesto was not distributed in France at that time. Had not been translated over yet, I don't believe. It wasn't until later on, that summer, that it was. If I recall this correctly. I have covered this before in the past by reading to you things like Bastiat and de Tocqueville. But France was no refuge. Marx arrived in Paris penniless and exhausted, only to find that the communist influence in the new republic had whittled and died. The National Assembly was in the hands of the monarchical majority. As soon as possible, he fled from France, leaving his family to follow later because he was destitute of funds. He decided to make his permanent exile in London. Let's see. Check on the time here. Okay. Guys, I am definitely going to not go much longer over 5 today if I go into 5, because I have the show at, tonight at 7:30, I should say. Normally it's at 7. But yeah, I want some time in between, and I gotta do a few last things with memes, and got to be setting up the stream for sure by 7. Get the links out to everyone. Be in the the StreamYards. And then, by the way, Holly, I did figure out how to, I had to click a few buttons just to get it to stream over on DLive and Trovo. So my bad last week for not realizing that. But hopefully this week will be a little bit better. So, anyways, I'm going to continue with this for, another few sections. We'll see where it takes us. And then we'll get into the politics of obedience. It says the end of the Communist League. Although Marx had to cram his family into a cheap one-room apartment in the slums of London, he felt sufficiently satisfied with the well-being to immediately concentrate his attention once again on the task of reviving the fires of the revolution. In spite of the spirit of dedication, however, Marx's effort to lead out did more harm than good. His agitating spirit always seemed to create splinters and quarrels in the ranks of his confederates. Before long, he had particularly cut himself off from his former associates. The Central Committee was taken out from under his influence and transferred to Cologne. There it remained until 1852, when all communist leaders in Germany were arrested and sentenced to heavy prison terms for revolutionary activities. That is, insurrection! Like BLM and Antifa have been doing for years now, but particularly recently. Unlike the some odd people that just happened to walk through the Capitol building. No, I'm not saying that there weren't some riots going on there. But that's, it's hard to form a full picture, but a lot of that, I think, was a lot of hype and talking up of the police department. There was a purposeful, seemingly, either the government's totally incompetent or it purposely did not do what it needed to do to secure the area initially. But, I mean, go watch the video from the hearing the other day. It's interesting. It's interesting to see how no one has any answers who are in the government. It's like the way things always go when it comes to government hearings. No one knows anything. Or if they do, they're not allowed to talk about it now, are they? They're lying. Yeah, that happens a lot. Marx did everything in his powers to save his estranged comrades. He gathered documents, recruited witnesses, and proposed various legal arguments which he thought might help. But in spite of all this yeoman service, the verdicts of guilty pulled out of active revolutionary service every one of the last party leaders went on trial. This sounded the death knell of the Communist League. The death nail. I don't know if I can enunciate that properly, but yeah, you guys got it. The family of Karl Marx. Let's see. From this time on, the Marx family lived in London and in the most extreme poverty. A particular combination of emotions was expressed by Marx in his correspondence during this period. On the one hand, he expressed soulful concern for the welfare of his wife and children. He confessed in a letter to Engels that the nocturnal tears and lamentations of his wife were almost beyond endurance. Then, in the same letter, he bitterly went about explaining how he was spending his whole time studying history, politics, economics, and social problems so as to figure out the answers for all the problems of the world. So basically, his family wasn't taken care of, and he did nothing about it. If he had studied all these things and could make money, then great. Sounded like at the time he needed to make money, though. Sounded like that they were in destitute and, weren't doing so well. If they were getting by, it'd be one thing, but they weren't. He didn't care, though. And you're going to hear more. You're going to hear a lot more about Marx and how he treated his family. In 1852, his little daughter, Francisca, died. 2 years later marked the passing of his young son, Edgar, and 2 years after that, a baby died at birth. This was common, though, folks. But poverty had a big part in it. Poverty always has a big part in it. This is why a lot of times the socialists go, oh, we got to give everyone money and blah, 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 blah. That doesn't make people rich, though. They never earned it. And when you don't earn things, you tend to be irresponsible with it. This is why lottery winners will usually be just as poor, or often in worse condition, within a year or two of winning the lottery. They didn't earn that money. It was just given to them. It's really easy when you have a big old pot of gold to spend it. When you have to hustle to build your pot of gold, it's something else. A few paragraphs from his letter written by Mrs. Marks indicates the amazing loyalty of this woman who saw her half-fed children dying around her while her father spent days and nights in the British Museum library. While their father, that is. Sure, but back in those days, getting divorced was pretty rare. For common people, at least. And in those times, especially in England too, I'm not quite sure that the women of certain political or financial classes might have had a great deal of freedom. I don't think that people who were poor did. Let me describe only one day of this life, as it actually was, since wet nurses are exceedingly expensive here. I made up my mind, despite terrible pains in the breast and in the back, to nurse the baby myself. But the poor little angel drank in so much sorrow with the milk that he was continually fretting in violent pain day and night. Since he has been in the world, he has not slept a single night through. At most 2 or 3 hours of late. There have been violent spasms, so that the child is continually betwixt life and death. When thus afflicted, he sucked so vigorously that my nipple became sore and bled. Often the blood streamed into his little mouth. One day I was sitting like this when our landlady suddenly appeared. Since we could not pay this sum of £5, instantly 2 brokers came to the house and took possession of all my belongings, bedding, clothing, and everything, even the baby's cradle and the little girl's toys, so that the children wept bitterly. Well, that's tragic and ridiculous, and I don't care if you owe someone a debt. You shouldn't come and take their property and impoverish them even more. Obviously, it's not going to help them out. But it makes me wonder if she's having such hard time breastfeeding, what her health was. What was she eating? They threatened to take everything away in 2 hours. Fortunately, they did not. If this had happened, I should have had to lie on the floor with my freezing children beside me. Next day we had to leave. It was cold and rainy. My husband tried to find lodging, but as soon as he said he had 4 children, no one would take us. At length, a friend helped us. We paid what is owed, and I quickly sold all my beds and bedding in order to settle accounts with the chemist, the baker, and the milkman. I mean, this is just sad and tragic to read. This guy's a great thinker and scholar, though, right? Can't even handle basic household business. I don't know that his thoughts on how to fix the world are in any way relevant when he can't take care of his own house. Not to get all Peterson on you here, but it's a reality, guys. This is also a parallel to all the people that are Marxists today. They're messes, are they not? And don't get me wrong, a lot of degrees, society has failed them because they've enslaved them and made them this way, and our grandparents great-grandparents, whatever it was, however many generations for you, gave over this authority to the government, didn't stop it, didn't say, hey, 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 hey. No, they didn't do that. In fact, they just voted it back in. If FDR would not have passed, if he would not have been, riddled with polio and everything else, he very well could have been the president for 2 decades. I mean, people loved him. They were like, oh yeah, we need to do all this, this and that, and just completely gave up their liberties. Like that. It's sad. But, people don't get to know God in their own lives, and so they pick men to be gods for them. Thus, the years passed. Literally, hundreds of letters were exchanged between Engels and Marx, and nearly all of them refer in one place or another to money. Engels' letters characteristically contain the phrase "enclosed" is a post office order for £5, while Marx's epistles are shot through with exasperated passages such as, "My mother has positively assured me that she will protest any bill drawn on her. For 10 days we have been without a soul in the house. You will agree that I am dipped up to my ears in petty bourgeois pickles." At one point in the bitter existence, there seemed to be a sudden ray of hope. During a particular desperate period when Engels could give no relief, Marx made a trip to Holland, where a prosperous uncle generously handed him £160. This was enough to put Marx on his financial feet, pay off his debts, and give him a new start. That's really interesting because I don't know what £160 is today, but it's whatever value, it's close in to like $160 US. I would assume. I mean, I could probably look that up real quick. Let's see here. Okay, £160 is worth $225 US today. So I'm going to assume that that the inflation on that is tremendous, and the debt he had was quite large. But with money in his pocket, Marx decided to take a tour of Germany. He visited his mother in Treves, proceeded to Berlin, undertook a number of drinking excursions with his old friends, had himself photographed, and generally played the role of a gentleman of leisure. 2 months later, he returned home. Frau Marx welcomed her tourist husband, thinking that now bills could be paid, clothing and furniture could be purchased, and better rooms rented. She was horrified to learn that practically nothing remained of their £160. I'm really curious now what the inflationary rate was. Let's see, pounds, 1850s pounds, inflation. So 150 pounds in the 1850s would have been worth 13,888 today. And I'll convert that to dollars. And that's $19,483.45. So that is an entry level job wage, annual wage worth of debt that Karl Marx had. And he spent nearly all of it on himself, on drinking, on fun. All the while, his wife was by herself, trying to raise children and barely getting along. The founding of the First International. I think we'll pick it up there. Let's read a little bit from the Politics of Obedience, because there's just a few pages to read before it gets into the next section. And I think I'll just read those couple of pages left. And then we'll end it for the day. But I will be back over on the Justify the Memes at 7:30 with Holly Midlife, who is currently now in the chat, and our friends from the Weekly Narrative, Jeremy and Delaney. And it should be a good time, as it always is with them. And I really liked Jeremy's performance last night with the impromptu discussion. And also, Jeremy didn't even go after his positions. He just said that in good, certain things in good faith, but he just maintained his frame, which is a good thing to do. He maintained how he was viewing things, and he didn't allow it to be changed or swayed. So, the politics of obedience. Let's see here. Our own leaders have employed in France certain similar devices, such as toads, fleuries, sacred vessels, and standards with flames of gold. All right, let's read a little bit above here, because there's got to be something here that I missed. So there was this poem that we read about, making them, I think this is where we were at. Should be. Yeah. These people propping themselves up sort of like gods, but yeah. All right, well. Figure it out here. However that may be, I do not wish for my part to be incredulous, since neither we nor our ancestors have had any occasion up until now for skepticism. Our kings have always been so generous in times of peace and so valiant in times of war that from birth they seem not to have been created by nature like many others. But even before birth, to have been designated by Almighty God for the government and preservation of this kingdom. Even if this were not so, yet should I not enter the tiny ground to call into question the truth of our traditions or to examine them so strictly as to take away their fine conceits? Here is such a field of our French poetry. Now I am merely honored, but it seems to me reborn through our Rosnard, our Beef, our Bally. These poets are defending our language so well that I dare to believe that very soon neither the Greeks nor the Latins will in the same respect have any advantage over us except possibly that of seniority. So what he's talking about is the development of the language, like this happened in England, right? This is why we have Chaucer and Shakespeare, right? They developed the language into a solid form because a lot of these languages were still very archaic even within this time period. And you have to understand that European languages are Romantic, meaning they come from Rome. They're forms of Latin, with the exception of the Norse languages, the Germanic languages, and the Celtic languages, and that French and Germanic influence mixed together, or that Latin and Germanic influence mixed together in Britain, the British Isles. And I should assuredly do wrong to our posies. I like to use that word despite the fact that several have rhymed mechanically, for I still discern a number of men totally capable of ennobling poetry and restoring it to its first luster. But as I say, I should do the muse great injury if I deprive her now of those fine tales about King Clovis, amongst which it seems to me I can already see how agreeably and how happily the inspiration of our Ronsard in his Francital will play. I appreciate his loftiness. I am aware of his keen spirit. I know the charm of the man. He will appropriate the Oriflamme to his use much as... Okay, yeah. Let's look that up so I know more specifically.
Oriflamme.
Oriflamme, okay. Old tradition. Oriflamme. And to use this much as did the Romans their sacred bunkers and shields cast from heaven to earth, according to Virgil. He will use our fale of holy oil, much as the Athenians used the basket of the Erythinius. He will applause for our deeds of valor as they did for their olive wreath, which they insist can still be found in Minerva's tower. Certainly, I should be presumptuous if I tried to cast slurs on our records and thus invade the realm of our poets. But to return to our subject, the thread of which I have unwittingly lost in this discussion, it has always happened that tyrants, in order to strengthen their power, have made every effort to train their people not only in obedience and servility towards themselves, but also in adoration. Therefore, all that I have said up until the present concerning the means by which a more willing submission has been obtained applies to dictators in their relation with the inferior and common classes. And this, my friends, is what I have been saying since the beginning of the show today. We make tyrants our gods. We worship them. Human beings do. Now, I might not, you might not out there listening, but this is a trend that you have to understand. People adore them. I've literally had women tell me, I love Nancy Pelosi. She's so great. I'm like, for what? She's a witch. What are you talking about? She hasn't done anything for you. She married into money. She organizes Democratic politics for decades in California, creates a stronghold, has so much power that when she finally goes into the Senate, she's or the House or whatever she is, whatever. She comes in and she's like, she does nothing but block and mess with the Republicans. It's really strange, and other Democrats are like afraid of her, afraid of the woman. Why would you be afraid of somebody in a representative democracy unless there's actually an oligarchy going on? The best description of English I heard is that it's 6 languages wearing a trench coat. Sure. Well, the thing is that a lot of our words are Latin and Greek, but the Latin comes through in the French. And there's a good little TED animation that talks about this, and that there is a hearty fire going, or you're greeted with a hearty greeting, and the other one's a cordial reception. Now they mean the same thing, but they the connotations there are one that's a little highbrow and one's a little lowbrow. And that's because the aristocracy spoke French. So parts of English that are going to have connotations that connote certain deeper meanings, like, elitism, they're always going to come from the French. There's a reason why French snobbery is a common trope, guys. Dalhawk, you never heard what expression? Or sorry, not Dalhawk. Oh, sorry. Shelley said that. My bad, guys. I looked over there real quick. Anything anywhere else in the chat? Obviously, Dalhawk, I see you sent a message. And the other over in the entropy. Things that cannot be said. That's only for those folks of you who are brave enough to go to entropy. So here we're at part 3. I'm just going to leave it here for today. I have the rest of the week. Like, guys, this is page 71 of 80 pages. We're probably going to get through it by the end of the week. This wasn't a long read in the first place. So after that, maybe I'll focus more on the Naked Communist. I don't know. I think I might switch things up because I like to do that because I can get overly bored with things. Not that I won't keep doing this, but, I've been talking about going back to reading Sarah from Rose's Nihilism, the Roots of the Revolution of the Modern Age. And there's a couple books, too, that are other interesting things, like on transhumanism and other stuff that might be interesting to delve into. I'm not like super into that. Tank's really into that stuff because, he's all about Uncle Ted. But hey, I mean, maybe we'll read Uncle Ted sometime. The British colonies highly influenced common English. Oh yeah, no doubt. See, change my camera out there. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to get out of here, relax a little bit, probably get some sun. Really nice day here. I shouldn't say that because it's going to start storming now. No, I mean, it was really nice yesterday, too. It's like 65, 70, very sunny, not humid at all. It's like a perfect kind of day for early June. No word on the babies yet. Like I said yesterday, if you guys heard me, because the stream was so screwed up, my wife will probably go by next week, because 10 days, that's Thursday, is generally the length of first-time mothers to go over. That's the average time. It doesn't mean that, average isn't average, right? I'm not going to get into how that works. I expect my audience to have a brain. Yeah, so far so good. And I, honestly, I want to get the show done with tonight, but we might do more on Sunday. I'd like to have a Sunday show over on the Ends Justify the Memes if Holly's available. I don't know if Tank would be. We could figure it out, Holly, later on when I get you in the stream later. But in any case, yeah, I should be back tomorrow. Like 95 humidity there, Dollhawk. Yeah, well, it's been that, dude. It's either been that or it's been raining and like 80 in high humidity. So it's been kind of gross no matter what. So the fact that we've had like 2 days so far of good weather, and I've barely been outside today, is quite nice. It's enjoyable. So I'm half tempted to go mow the lawn just so I can be outside for a little bit. but I'll probably save it for tomorrow. But yeah, guys, I'm trying to think because I'm not great with schedules, but I don't think I have anything going on. So the rest of the week should be pretty good as far as streaming at 3 p.m. And, like I said, we'll get through this. I might try and just push through the politics of obedience tomorrow. Again, the language of it, just the way it's written, is a little difficult for me, even though it's not that difficult. That's just the dyslexia. But hopefully I did quite a bit better than I did yesterday, because yesterday was brutal. Just so brutal. But that's about it, guys. I'll see you in about 2.5 hours if you want to come over to the Ends Justify the Memes tonight. We start at 7:30 tonight because Holly has her job and she can't make it by 7, and even 7:30 is rushing her a little bit. But I'm pretty sure it'll be all right. In any case, guys, I appreciate you showing up as always. And hey, this has been All Minus One. My name is Bill, and I wish you all well.